The highway stretched endlessly before Marcus Thompson, nothing but asphalt and darkness in every direction. Route 287 through eastern Wyoming had always been lonely, but tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like the road to nowhere. He'd been driving for 6 hours straight, pushing through the fatigue because he needed to reach Denver by morning. The radio had given up miles ago, dissolving into static that reminded him just how isolated he really was out here. Marcus wasn't the type to believe in anything he couldn't see, touch, or prove. 23 years as an electrical engineer had trained his mind to work in facts, measurements, and logical explanations. But as he crested another hill and saw the empty road stretching toward the horizon, something inside him whispered that tonight would challenge everything he thought he knew about reality. The first sign something was wrong came at 2:17 a.m. His dashboard clock glowed green in the darkness when his engine suddenly stuttered. Not the gradual decline of mechanical failure, but an instant loss of power that made no sense. His headlights dimmed, then surged back to full brightness. The radio crackled once, picking up a fragment of music before falling silent again. Marcus pulled over, his hazard lights blinking weakly in the vast emptiness. He popped the hood and examined the engine with his phone's flashlight, but everything looked normal. Battery connections were tight. Belts were intact. Nothing seemed out of place, yet his car had behaved like someone had flipped a switch and momentarily cut the power to everything. That's when he noticed the silence. Not just quiet, but absolute silence. No wind, no insects, no distant highway noise. Even his own breathing seemed muted, as if the air itself had thickened around him. The kind of silence that makes you question whether you've gone deaf, except he could still hear his heartbeat growing faster in his chest. He climbed back into his car, turned the key, and the engine roared to life as if nothing had happened. The radio resumed its static hiss. His headlights cut through the darkness normally, but that unnatural silence lingered just beyond the reach of his headlight beams, waiting. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus drove in a state of hyper-alert awareness. Every shadow seemed significant. Every flicker of his headlights felt intentional. His rational mind kept offering explanations. Electrical malfunction. Altitude affecting the engine. Maybe he was more tired than he'd realized, and his perception was playing tricks on him. But then he saw the light. It appeared first as a distant glow on the horizon, soft and blue-white like moonlight reflecting off snow. Except there was no moon visible tonight, and the landscape around him was brown grass and scrub brush. The light grew larger as he drove toward it, not brighter but somehow more present, more real than anything else in his field of vision. Marcus slowed his car, every instinct screaming at him to turn around. But curiosity, that dangerous human trait that had driven him through years of engineering problems, wouldn't let him retreat. He needed to understand what he was seeing. His mind was already cataloging possibilities. Emergency flare, crashed aircraft, some kind of industrial accident. The light moved, not drifted or swayed like something affected by wind, but moved with purpose and intelligence. It rose from the horizon, maintaining its soft glow, and began to approach his position. Marcus stopped his car in the middle of the empty highway and watched through his windshield as something impossible drew closer. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. 23 years of engineering experience couldn't provide a single explanation for what he was witnessing. The light had no visible source, no beam or reflection. It simply existed, floating about 30 feet above the ground, moving with deliberate intent directly toward him. Every rational part of his brain was shouting at him to drive away as fast as possible. This wasn't natural. This wasn't explainable. This was the kind of encounter that happened to other people, The kind of story he would have dismissed without a second thought if someone had told it to him yesterday. But he couldn't move. Not from fear, though fear was certainly flooding his system. He couldn't move because something deeper than logic was telling him this moment was significant, that whatever was approaching him through the Wyoming darkness was going to change his understanding of everything. The light stopped approximately 50 yards from his car. Close enough that he could see it clearly, far enough that he still had options if he needed to escape. It hovered there, pulsing gently like a heartbeat made of luminescence. And in that pulsing rhythm, Marcus began to sense something that defied every scientific principle he'd ever learned: intelligence. The light wasn't just some atmospheric phenomenon or unusual weather pattern. Something was aware inside that glow. Something was watching him, studying him, making decisions about what would happen next. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and he felt his worldview cracking at its foundations. Then the light began to descend. Marcus gripped his steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His foot found the accelerator, ready to floor it and speed away from whatever was happening. But as the light touched the ground, something extraordinary occurred. The harsh Wyoming landscape around it began to change. The dried grass didn't catch fire or wither away. Instead, it seemed to shimmer and grow more vivid, as if the light was revealing colors that had always been there but were invisible to normal perception. The very air around the light appeared cleaner, clearer, filled with a quality Marcus had never experienced before. And then he heard the voice. Not through his radio or from outside the car, but somehow directly in his mind. Gentle, patient, completely unlike anything he could have imagined. "Do not be afraid, Marcus." The sound of his own name spoken by something impossible sent shock waves through his entire body. His heart hammered against his ribs, his breathing became shallow and rapid. But underneath the terror, he felt something else. Recognition, as if some part of him had been waiting his entire life for this moment. "I know this is difficult to accept," the voice continued, carrying warmth and understanding that seemed to flow directly into his consciousness. "Your mind is trained to seek logical explanations, and what you're experiencing challenges everything you believe about reality." Marcus tried to speak but found his voice had abandoned him. He sat frozen in his driver's seat, staring at the impossible light that had somehow learned his name and was now speaking directly into his thoughts. "I have traveled very far to find you," the voice said. "Not just across distance, but across dimensions of existence your science has not yet discovered. I come bearing a message that will seem impossible, but which carries truth more fundamental than any equation you have ever solved." The light pulsed brighter, and Marcus felt warmth spreading through his chest. Not physical warmth, but something deeper. Something that touched places in his soul he hadn't known existed. "I am a messenger, sent by one you call Jesus." The words hit Marcus like lightning. Jesus. The name he'd heard in childhood Sunday school classes before logic and science had convinced him that such stories were merely human attempts to explain an unexplainable universe. The name that represented everything his rational mind had dismissed as primitive superstition. "Your confusion is natural," the voice continued, somehow sensing his internal struggle. "You have been taught to see science and spirit as opposing forces. But Marcus, what if I told you they are the same force, expressed in different languages? What if the intelligence that designed the laws of physics you study is the same intelligence that designed love, compassion, and the human capacity for wonder?" Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, though he couldn't remember when they had started. The messenger's words were reshaping something fundamental inside him, breaking down walls he'd spent decades building between reason and faith. "Why me?" he finally managed to whisper, his voice cracking with emotion. The light pulsed gently, and he felt the messenger's attention focus on him with the laser intensity. But instead of feeling examined or judged, he felt seen. Truly seen, perhaps for the first time in his life. Because you have been searching, Marcus. Every equation you've solved, every circuit you've designed, every moment you've stood in wonder at the elegant complexity of the universe, you have been asking the same question that brought me here tonight. You have been asking whether there is intelligence behind the beauty you see in mathematics and physics, whether the universe has purpose beyond random chance. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. The messenger had articulated something he'd never been able to put into words, a longing that had driven his entire career without him fully understanding it. Tonight, I am here to give you the answer you have been seeking. The presence around Marcus intensified, and he felt his understanding of reality stretching beyond anything he'd ever imagined possible. The messenger's energy seemed to encompass him, not threatening but infinitely patient, like a teacher waiting for a struggling student to grasp a crucial concept. The universe you study through your instruments and equations is only the beginning layer of existence, the voice continued, each word resonating through Marcus's consciousness with crystalline clarity. Beyond the physical realm, you measure lies dimension upon dimension of reality, each operating under principles that expand rather than contradict what you already know to be true. Marcus found his voice again, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Are you saying science is wrong? A wave of gentle amusement flowed from the messenger, like the warmth of understanding laughter. Science is not wrong, Marcus. Science is incomplete. Every law of physics you've mastered, every mathematical constant you've memorized, every engineering principle you've applied, they are all accurate descriptions of one level of existence. But they are like someone studying only the foundation of a magnificent cathedral and believing they understand the entire structure. The light shifted, and Marcus felt his perception expanding in ways that should have been impossible. Suddenly, he could see the familiar highway around him, but he could also sense layers of existence extending infinitely beyond the physical. Energy patterns flowing through dimensions his instruments could never detect. Intelligence operating on scales both vast and intimate. Life forms existing in states of being that had no equivalent in earthly experience. This is what Jesus came to reveal, the messenger explained, as Marcus struggled to process what he was experiencing. Not to oppose science, but to show humanity that existence extends far beyond what your current understanding can measure. He walked among you as a bridge between dimensions, demonstrating that consciousness itself is the fundamental force from which all physical laws emerge. Marcus felt something profound shifting inside his chest, as if pieces of a puzzle he'd been working on his entire life were finally clicking into place. But the miracles, the resurrection, they violate everything we know about biology and physics. They violate nothing, the messenger replied with infinite patience. They demonstrate principles your science has not yet discovered. When Jesus walked on water, he was manipulating gravitational fields through consciousness. When he healed the sick, he was directing energy at cellular frequencies your medicine is only beginning to understand. When he rose from death, he was transitioning between dimensions in ways that your physics will eventually prove possible. The revelation struck Marcus like a thunderbolt. Everything he'd dismissed as religious mythology suddenly reframed itself as advanced science, operating on principles humanity hadn't yet developed the tools to measure. You're saying Jesus was using technology we don't understand yet. I'm saying consciousness is the technology, the messenger corrected gently. What you call mind, what you experience as awareness, is not produced by your brain. Your brain is simply the receiver, like a radio tuning into frequencies of consciousness that exist independent of physical matter. Jesus demonstrated mastery over these frequencies, showing humanity its true potential. Marcus felt his worldview reshaping itself in real time. Every assumption he'd made about the separation between mind and matter, between spirit and science, was dissolving into a larger understanding that somehow made more sense than anything he'd ever believed before. "The message I bring tonight is not just for you," the messenger continued. "Across your world, others like you are receiving similar visits. Scientists, engineers, doctors, researchers. Those whose minds are trained to seek truth are being awakened to truths that will transform your civilization." "Why now?" Marcus asked, his voice stronger as he began to integrate what he was learning. "Why is this happening now?" The light pulsed with what felt like urgency mixed with hope, because humanity stands at a crossroads. Your technology is advancing rapidly, but your consciousness has not kept pace. You have developed the power to transform your world, but not the wisdom to use that power responsibly. Without spiritual evolution to match your scientific progress, you risk destroying not just your civilization, but your opportunity to join the greater community of conscious beings throughout creation. Marcus felt the weight of this revelation settling on his shoulders. "What kind of community?" "The universe teems with intelligent life, Marcus. Civilizations spanning galaxies, beings of pure consciousness, entities that have transcended physical form entirely while maintaining individual identity. Earth is not isolated. It never has been. But humanity must evolve beyond its current level of consciousness before it can be welcomed into this cosmic family." The implications staggered him. Everything humanity believed about its place in the universe was fundamentally wrong. They weren't alone, but they also weren't ready for contact with the vast intelligence that surrounded them. "The process has already begun," the messenger continued, sensing his overwhelm. "Individuals like yourself are being awakened gradually, carefully, in ways that won't shatter your psychological frameworks entirely. Each person who experiences this expansion of consciousness becomes a bridge, helping others make the transition when they're ready." "What am I supposed to do with this knowledge?" Marcus asked, feeling the enormous responsibility settling on him. "Live it," came the simple reply. "Return to your work, but with expanded understanding. Continue your engineering, but recognize that you're working with forces that extend far beyond mechanical principles. Approach your equations knowing that mathematics is the language of cosmic intelligence, expressing itself through physical reality." Marcus felt something changing in the quality of the light around him, as if the encounter was drawing toward its conclusion. Panic rose in his chest. He wasn't ready for this to end. He had 1,000 questions, 1,000,000 things he needed to understand. "Will I see you again?" he asked desperately. "You will never be without guidance," the messenger assured him. "Now that your consciousness has been awakened to these frequencies, you will begin to perceive the help that has always surrounded you. Other messengers, other beings of light, consciousness that exists to assist those who are ready to evolve. You will learn to recognize their presence in synchronicities, in moments of inspiration, in solutions that come to you from sources beyond your rational mind." The light began to rise slowly from the ground, and Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of loss mixed with profound gratitude. His life would never be the same. Everything he thought he knew about existence had been transformed in the space of a single impossible encounter. "Remember," the messenger's voice came to him one final time as the light ascended into the star-filled sky, "love is the fundamental force that holds all reality together. Every equation you solve, every problem you engineer, every moment of wonder you experience while contemplating the universe, you are touching the mind of the divine intelligence that created it all. Never forget that you are not separate from that intelligence. You are an expression of it, awakening to your true nature. The light disappeared into the vastness above, leaving Marcus alone on the empty highway with stars that now seemed infinitely more significant than they had just hours before. He sat in his car, trembling, tears streaming down his face, knowing that his real journey was just beginning. Marcus sat in his car for what felt like hours, though his dashboard clock insisted only minutes had passed since the light disappeared. His hands still trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, and his mind struggled to process what had just occurred. The rational part of him, the engineer who solved problems with logic and measurements, was frantically searching for explanations that would restore his familiar world. Hallucination brought on by fatigue, some kind of experimental military aircraft, a sophisticated hoax using advanced projection technology. But even as he cycled through these possibilities, he knew they were desperate attempts to cling to a reality that no longer existed. The warmth in his chest hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger, spreading through his entire body like a gentle current of electricity that his instruments could never measure. This wasn't the aftermath of a delusion. This was the lingering presence of something that had fundamentally altered his cellular structure, his very consciousness. Marcus finally started his engine and continued down Route 287, but everything had changed. The darkness no longer felt oppressive or lonely. Instead, it seemed alive with possibilities, pregnant with intelligence that operated just beyond the edge of his perception. The stars above weren't distant balls of gas burning in empty space. They were part of a vast network of consciousness, each point of light potentially harboring civilizations that had already made the evolutionary leap he was just beginning. His radio crackled back to life, picking up a late-night talk show from Denver. The host was interviewing a physicist about quantum mechanics and the possibility of parallel dimensions. Marcus nearly laughed out loud at the synchronicity. Yesterday, he would have dismissed such conversations as theoretical speculation. Tonight, he understood them as humanity's clumsy first steps toward comprehending truths that messengers like the one he'd encountered took for granted. The miles rolled by, and Marcus found his mind working differently than it ever had before. Engineering problems that had puzzled him for weeks suddenly seemed to have obvious solutions, as if his expanded consciousness could now perceive patterns and connections that had previously been invisible. Mathematical relationships that he'd memorized by rote now revealed themselves as expressions of deeper harmonies that governed not just physical systems, but the architecture of existence itself. By the time he reached the outskirts of Denver, dawn was breaking over the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that seemed more vivid than any sunrise he'd ever witnessed. The messenger had been right about his perception changing. Colors appeared richer, sounds carried more depth, and the very air seemed charged with an energy that made every breath feel like a small miracle. Marcus pulled into a truck stop to fuel up and found himself studying the other travelers with new eyes. The tired businessman grabbing coffee before his morning flight. The long-haul trucker stretching his legs beside his rig. The young family with children asking endless questions about everything they saw. Each person carried the same spark of consciousness he'd felt radiating from the messenger, though most seemed completely unaware of their true nature. How many others had received visits like his? How many engineers, scientists, doctors, and researchers were walking around this morning carrying impossible knowledge, trying to figure out how to integrate cosmic truths with mundane responsibilities? The messenger had implied this awakening was happening globally, but Marcus realized he might never recognize others who'd undergone similar experiences. The knowledge came with a natural discretion, an understanding that sharing it carelessly could cause more harm than good. Inside the truck stop, Marcus bought coffee and found himself drawn to a rack of newspapers near the checkout counter. Headlines about political conflicts, economic uncertainty, and environmental crises filled the front pages. But now he could see these surface-level problems as symptoms of the deeper issue the messenger had described. Humanity's technology was advancing faster than its wisdom, creating power without the consciousness to use it responsibly. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, smiled at him as she rang up his coffee. "Long night on the road?" she asked, and Marcus heard something in her voice that made him look at her more carefully. There was a quality of presence about her, a depth of awareness that suggested she might understand more than her humble circumstances implied. Marcus found himself wondering if she too had encountered something that had expanded her perception of reality. Maybe not a messenger of light, but perhaps some other form of awakening that had left her radiating the same peaceful energy he'd felt from his celestial visitor. "Very long," Marcus replied, and something in his tone must have conveyed more than just physical exhaustion, because her smile deepened with what looked like recognition. "Those are the nights that change us," she said quietly, handing him his receipt. "Safe travels." Marcus left the truck stop feeling less alone. The messenger had promised he would recognize guidance in synchronicities and unexpected moments of connection, and he suspected his brief exchange with the cashier had been exactly that kind of sign. He wasn't the only one carrying this expanded awareness. Others were out there, living ordinary lives while harboring extraordinary understanding. The drive to his hotel in downtown Denver gave Marcus time to consider what came next. He had a presentation scheduled for this afternoon, a routine engineering consultation that yesterday would have been just another professional obligation. But now he understood that there were no routine moments anymore. Every interaction, every problem he solved, every equation he worked with would be an opportunity to apply his expanded consciousness to the world around him. The messenger had told him to live the knowledge rather than simply possess it. As Marcus navigated the morning traffic, he began to see how that might work. His engineering skills hadn't disappeared. They'd been enhanced by understanding that physical systems were expressions of deeper patterns that governed all existence. Every circuit he designed, every structural problem he solved, would now be informed by awareness of the cosmic intelligence that had created the mathematical principles he worked with daily. His hotel room overlooked the Denver skyline, and Marcus stood at the window watching the city wake up. Millions of people starting their days, most of them completely unaware that they were part of a universe teeming with conscious life. Most of them believing that humanity was alone, that consciousness was just a byproduct of brain chemistry, that death was the end of individual existence. Marcus pulled out his laptop and opened the presentation he was scheduled to give that afternoon. It was about optimizing power distribution systems for a new office complex, the kind of technical problem he'd solved hundreds of times before. But as he reviewed his slides, he began to see opportunities to introduce concepts that might plant seeds of expanded thinking in his audience. He wouldn't mention his encounter with the messenger, of course. That would accomplish nothing except to undermine his credibility and close minds that might otherwise be receptive to new ideas. But he could talk about the elegant mathematical relationships that governed electrical systems, the way energy flowed according to principles that seemed to reflect deeper intelligence. He could present the technical material in ways that invited his listeners to consider whether the universe might be more purposeful and interconnected than conventional science acknowledged. The messenger had said that consciousness was the fundamental technology, that awareness itself could influence physical reality. Marcus didn't yet understand how to apply this principle practically, but he sensed that his work would gradually reveal opportunities to explore the intersection between mind and matter, between intention and outcome. His phone buzzed with a text message from his colleague back in Colorado Springs. "Hope your Denver meeting goes well. Weird thing happened last night, saw the strangest lights over Pikes Peak. Probably just military exercises, but made me think about how much we don't know about what's really out there." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. Another synchronicity, another sign that the awakening was spreading beyond his own experience. His colleague was a pragmatic electrical engineer like himself, not the type to imagine things or jump to wild conclusions. If he was seeing unexplained lights and questioning what humanity didn't know, perhaps he too was being prepared for expanded understanding. Marcus typed back carefully. "The universe is full of mysteries. Maybe we're just starting to develop the tools to perceive them." The response came quickly. "Exactly what I was thinking. We should grab coffee when you get back and talk about some of the weird quantum research I've been reading about." Marcus smiled, recognizing another piece of the puzzle falling into place. The messenger had been right about guidance appearing in unexpected ways. His colleague's invitation wasn't just about sharing professional curiosity. It was an opportunity to explore these new concepts with someone whose mind might be opening to possibilities beyond conventional science. As the morning progressed, Marcus found himself seeing similar signs everywhere. A news report about scientists discovering new particles that challenged existing theories about the structure of matter. An article about researchers documenting cases of unexplained healing that seemed to involve some kind of mind-body connection. A documentary advertised about ancient technologies that appeared to be more advanced than historians had previously believed possible. The world was preparing for expanded understanding, and Marcus realized he was part of a much larger process than he'd initially comprehended. The messenger hadn't visited him because he was special or chosen in some exclusive way. He'd been visited because his consciousness had reached a point where it could safely integrate this knowledge and use it to help others make similar transitions. The responsibility felt enormous, but so did the support. Every synchronicity, every unexpected connection, every moment when solutions appeared from sources beyond his rational mind would be evidence that he wasn't working alone. The intelligence that had sent the messenger was actively involved in guiding humanity's evolution, working through individuals like himself to gradually introduce concepts that would eventually transform civilization. Marcus closed his laptop and prepared for his afternoon presentation, knowing that it would be the first of many opportunities to serve as a bridge between humanity's current understanding and the cosmic consciousness that awaited its recognition. The real work was just beginning, and he had never felt more alive or more purposeful in his entire life. Marcus arrived at the downtown engineering firm where his presentation was scheduled, but something had shifted in how he perceived the familiar corporate environment. The sterile conference room with its fluorescent lighting and beige walls seemed almost primitive now, like a cave where people gathered to discuss shadows on the wall while remaining oblivious to the brilliant sunlight outside. His audience consisted of 12 professionals, architects, and project managers who needed his expertise on power distribution systems. As Marcus set up his laptop, he studied their faces and wondered if any of them had experienced moments that challenged their understanding of reality. The woman in the navy suit checking her phone might have dismissed strange dreams as meaningless. The man reviewing blueprints could have explained away an inexplicable coincidence as random chance. "Good afternoon, everyone," Marcus began, his voice carrying a confidence that surprised him. "Today, we're going to talk about power distribution, but I want to start with something most of us rarely consider. Every time you flip a light switch, you're interacting with forces that follow mathematical principles so elegant and precise that they seem almost choreographed." He clicked to his first slide, showing the basic equations that governed electrical flow. But instead of diving immediately into technical specifications, he paused and looked around the room. These equations didn't emerge from human invention. We discovered them. They were already operating in the universe, waiting for us to recognize patterns that had been there since the beginning of time. Which raises an interesting question. What intelligence designed these patterns to be so beautifully consistent? Marcus caught a flicker of curiosity in several faces. The messenger had been right about planting seeds. People were hungry for meaning beyond the mechanical, even in corporate conference rooms. For the next hour, Marcus delivered his technical presentation with unprecedented clarity and depth. But woven throughout the engineering data was a subtle invitation to consider whether the universe might be more purposeful than random chance would suggest. He talked about energy flowing according to principles that seemed to reflect intelligence. He mentioned how mathematical constants appeared to be fine-tuned for the existence of complex systems. During the break, the woman in the Navy suit approached him. "I've heard dozens of engineering presentations," she said quietly, "but you're the first person who made me feel like we're working with something sacred rather than just manipulating resources." Marcus felt the familiar warmth spreading through his chest. Another connection. Another consciousness beginning to recognize possibilities beyond the purely material. "Maybe that's because we are working with something sacred," he replied. "Maybe every problem we solve is a form of prayer. Every equation we balance is a way of harmonizing with the intelligence that created those patterns in the first place." She nodded thoughtfully. "I never considered it that way, but it makes sense. There's something about elegant engineering solutions that feels almost spiritual, like we're discovering truth rather than creating it." The afternoon session went even better than the morning. Marcus found himself accessing insights that seemed to come from sources beyond his conscious mind. Solutions to complex distribution problems appeared fully formed, as if some invisible intelligence was guiding his thinking toward optimal outcomes. His audience was engaged in ways that went beyond professional interest. They seemed to sense they were participating in something larger than a routine technical consultation. After the presentation, Marcus walked through downtown Denver as the sun set behind the mountains. The city lights were beginning to twinkle, each one representing the flow of energy through systems he understood more deeply than ever before. But more than that, each light represented human consciousness, individual sparks of awareness that were part of a vast network of intelligence spanning the cosmos. His phone rang as he reached his hotel. The caller ID showed his sister Sarah, a pediatric nurse in Phoenix whom he hadn't spoken to in months. Marcus hesitated before answering, wondering how he could possibly explain what had happened to him without sounding completely unhinged. "Marcus, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Sarah's voice carried an unusual tension. "Something really strange happened to me last night and I couldn't stop thinking about calling you. I know you're the scientist in the family, so maybe you can help me make sense of it." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of strange?" "I was working the night shift, and around 3 in the morning I stepped outside the hospital for some fresh air. The sky was incredibly clear, and I was just looking at the stars when I saw this light. Not an airplane or helicopter, nothing that made any sense. It was beautiful, almost alive, and for just a moment I felt like it was looking back at me." The warmth in Marcus's chest intensified. Sarah's experience might not have been as direct as his own encounter, but it sounded like she too was being prepared for expanded awareness. "Did you feel anything unusual?" Marcus asked carefully. "That's the weird part." "I felt this incredible sense of peace, like everything in my life suddenly made perfect sense. All the stress from work, the worry about Mom's health, the loneliness since David and I broke up, it all just dissolved. For maybe 10 minutes, I understood that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Marcus closed his eyes, recognizing the signature of contact. The messenger had told him that awakening was happening to others, and now he was witnessing it in his own family. Sarah, what if I told you that what you experienced was real? Not just emotionally real, but genuinely real in ways that science is only beginning to understand. There was a long pause. I'd say that's exactly what I hoped you would tell me, even though it sounds impossible. For the next 2 hours, Marcus and Sarah talked in ways they never had before. He shared his own experience carefully, focusing on the profound sense of connection and purpose rather than the more dramatic elements that might overwhelm her. Sarah described moments throughout her nursing career when she'd felt guided to exactly the right treatment for a patient, times when her intuition had led her to solutions that medical training alone couldn't explain. It's like there's this intelligence that wants to help, Sarah said as their conversation drew to a close. Something that cares about each patient, each moment of suffering, each opportunity to heal. I always attributed it to experience or instinct, but maybe it's something more. Maybe it's something that's been there all along, Marcus agreed, waiting for us to recognize it and learn to work with it consciously. After they hung up, Marcus sat in his hotel room, feeling the magnitude of what was unfolding. The awakening wasn't happening in isolation. It was spreading through networks of human connection, family relationships, professional contacts, chance encounters that weren't really chance at all. Each person who experienced expanded consciousness became a catalyst for others, creating ripple effects that would eventually transform entire communities. That night, Marcus dreamed of vast cities of light existing in dimensions parallel to physical reality. He saw beings of pure consciousness working together on projects that spanned galaxies, civilizations that had long ago transcended the limitations of matter while maintaining the joy of individual creativity and expression. In the dream, he understood that Earth was being invited to join this cosmic community, but only when humanity evolved beyond its current level of consciousness. He woke with tears on his face and absolute certainty that his encounter with the messenger had been just the beginning of a journey that would reshape not just his own life, but the entire trajectory of human evolution. The universe was alive with intelligence, and that intelligence was actively working to guide humanity toward its next stage of development. Marcus packed his bags and prepared for the drive back to Colorado Springs, knowing that every person he encountered from now on was a potential catalyst for transformation. The cashier who'd recognized something in his eyes had been right. The nights that changed us were just the beginning. The real work happened in the days and years that followed, as ordinary people learned to live extraordinary truths in the midst of everyday responsibilities. The highway stretched ahead of him, no longer empty and lonely, but alive with possibility. Somewhere out there, other travelers were having their own encounters with the impossible, their own moments of awakening to the vast intelligence that permeated every atom of existence. Marcus merged into the morning traffic, ready to serve as a bridge between worlds, knowing that he would never again be alone on any road he traveled. The drive back to Colorado Springs took Marcus through landscapes that seemed transformed by his new awareness. Every mountain peak catching the morning light, every valley filled with shadow, every mile of a highway stretching toward the horizon carried significance that reached far beyond their physical appearance. He found himself understanding that the messenger's visit hadn't been an isolated event, but part of an orchestrated awakening happening across the planet. His phone buzzed with messages throughout the journey. His colleague Tom had sent 3 texts about the strange lights he'd witnessed, each message revealing deeper curiosity about phenomena that conventional science couldn't adequately explain. A former professor from his graduate program had forwarded an article about quantum consciousness research, something Marcus would have dismissed as fringe science just days earlier, but now recognized as humanity's tentative steps toward cosmic truth. Even more intriguing was a voicemail from his neighbor Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who rarely spoke to anyone in their apartment complex. Her message was brief but loaded with meaning that Marcus now had the awareness to recognize. Marcus, I hope you don't think I'm crazy, but I had the most wonderful dream last night about your return from your trip. I saw you surrounded by light, and I understood that you had received something important that you would eventually share with others. I've been having dreams like this for weeks now, about people I know being visited by messengers who speak of love and transformation. Please call me when you have time. I think we need to talk. Marcus pulled over at a rest stop and listened to the message 3 times. Mrs. Chen had somehow perceived his encounter through her dreams, receiving information about his experience that she couldn't have obtained through any normal means. This wasn't coincidence. This was evidence of the interconnected consciousness the messenger had described, the network of awareness that linked all human beings at levels deeper than physical reality. He called her back immediately. Marcus, thank you for calling. Mrs. Chen's voice carried a warmth and clarity that he'd never noticed before. I know this must sound strange, but I've been seeing things in my dreams that I believe are real. Not symbolic or metaphorical, but genuinely real events happening to people I care about. Tell me about what you've been seeing, Marcus said, settling into his car seat and preparing to listen carefully. 3 nights ago, I dreamed about you standing on a dark highway, speaking with a being made of light. The being told you things about the nature of existence that changed your understanding of everything. In my dream, I could feel your fear transforming into wonder, your isolation dissolving into connection with something vast and loving. Marcus felt goosebumps rising on his arms. Mrs. Chen was describing his encounter with perfect accuracy, down to emotional details he hadn't shared with anyone. But you weren't the only one, she continued. I've been dreaming about Dr. Rodriguez from the medical clinic, standing in her office late at night as healing energy flows through her hands in ways medical school never taught. I've seen Professor Williams from the community college receiving mathematical insights that come from sources beyond human calculation. I've dreamed about Sarah, though I've never met your sister, working in a hospital where she suddenly understands that consciousness itself is the most powerful medicine. The implications staggered Marcus. Mrs. Chen was somehow tuned into the global awakening process, receiving information about multiple individuals who were being contacted and transformed. Her consciousness had become a kind of receiver for the network of intelligence that was orchestrating humanity's evolution. Mrs. Chen, how long have you been having dreams like this? Since I was a child in Shanghai, but they became much more frequent after my husband died 5 years ago. I think grief opened something in me, dissolved barriers I didn't know existed. I began perceiving connections between people that extend far beyond what we can see with our physical eyes. Marcus understood. Profound loss had stripped away Mrs. Chen's attachment to conventional reality, leaving her consciousness open to frequencies that most people couldn't access. She'd become a natural channel for the intelligence that was guiding humanity's transformation. What else are you seeing? Marcus asked, knowing that her dreams might provide crucial insights into the scope of what was happening. The beings of light are not all the same, Mrs. Chen explained, her voice taking on the quality of someone accessing deep memory. Some are messengers like the one who visited you, sent by the consciousness you call Jesus to prepare individuals for expanded understanding. But there are others, representatives from civilizations that have already made the evolutionary leap humanity is approaching. They're working together, coordinating contacts with people whose consciousness has reached the point where such encounters won't cause psychological damage. Marcus felt the pieces of a vast puzzle clicking into place. The messenger had implied that Earth was being invited to join a cosmic community of conscious beings, but Marcus hadn't fully grasped the complexity of what that meant. Multiple civilizations, multiple forms of consciousness, all working together to guide humanity through the most significant transformation in its history. In my dreams, I see the future they're working toward, Mrs. Chen continued. Cities that run on consciousness rather than fossil fuels. Medical centers where healing happens through the directed application of love and intention. Educational institutions where children learn to access knowledge directly from the cosmic intelligence that created the universe. Transportation systems that work by manipulating the fundamental forces of reality rather than burning chemical compounds. The vision she described sounded like science fiction, but Marcus now understood that what seemed impossible was simply humanity's next stage of development. Every technological advancement in human history had once seemed miraculous to previous generations. The consciousness-based civilization Mrs. Chen was seeing in her dreams was simply the natural outcome of recognizing that awareness itself was the fundamental force from which all physical phenomena emerged. But the transition won't be easy. Mrs. Chen's tone became more serious. I also see resistance, fear, people clinging to old ways of thinking even when those ways no longer serve them. Some will try to use expanding consciousness for selfish purposes rather than recognizing it as a gift meant to benefit all humanity. There will be a period of chaos as old systems break down and new ones struggle to emerge. Marcus thought about the headlines he'd seen that morning, the political conflicts and environmental crises that dominated the news. Perhaps these weren't just random problems, but symptoms of humanity's growing pains as it evolved toward a higher level of consciousness. The old ways of organizing society, based on competition and scarcity, were breaking down because they were incompatible with the expanded awareness that was emerging. What can we do to help? Marcus asked, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Live authentically, Mrs. Chen replied without hesitation. Use your expanded consciousness in your work, your relationships, your daily interactions. Don't try to convince people of anything. Just demonstrate through your presence what it looks like when someone operates from love rather than fear, from abundance rather than scarcity, from connection rather than separation. Marcus recognized the wisdom in her words. The messenger had given him similar guidance, emphasizing that transformation happened through example rather than argument, through being rather than preaching. There's something else, Mrs. Chen added quietly. In my dreams, I see groups forming. Not formal organizations, but networks of people who have had encounters like yours, who've experienced the expansion of consciousness and want to support others going through similar awakenings. You're going to be invited to join one of these groups soon. How will I recognize the invitation? You'll know, Mrs. Chen laughed gently. Once your consciousness has been activated at this level, synchronicities become impossible to ignore. The right people will appear at the right times, carrying exactly the information or opportunities you need for your continued growth. As if to prove her point, Marcus's phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. The message read, "Hello, Marcus. I know this sounds strange, but I was given your number by someone who said you recently had an experience that changed your understanding of reality. My name is Dr. Jennifer Walsh, and I'm a quantum physicist who's been researching consciousness-matter interactions. A group of us are meeting tomorrow evening to discuss some extraordinary recent developments. Would you be interested in joining us?" Marcus showed the message to Mrs. Chen, who smiled with satisfaction. See? It's already beginning. The network is connecting, finding ways to link people who need to find each other. Marcus typed back, "I'm very interested. Please send me the details." The response came within minutes, providing an address in downtown Colorado Springs and a meeting time. But more significantly, the message included a list of names of others who would be attending. Marcus recognized several of them. Dr. Rodriguez, the physician Mrs. Chen had mentioned in her dreams, Professor Williams from the community college, even Tom, his engineering colleague who'd been seeing strange lights. "It's happening so fast," Marcus murmured, staring at his phone in amazement. "Time is accelerating," Mrs. Chen explained. "The intelligence guiding this process understands that humanity has reached a critical juncture. Climate change, nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering. We've developed technologies that could either transform our civilization or destroy it entirely. The window for conscious evolution is narrowing, so the process is being accelerated." Marcus felt both excitement and trepidation about tomorrow's meeting. He would be gathering with others who'd experienced similar awakenings, people whose consciousness had been expanded in ways that defied conventional understanding. Together, they might begin to comprehend the full scope of the transformation that was occurring. "Mrs. Chen, will you be joining us?" "Not yet," she replied thoughtfully. "My role is different. I'm meant to serve as an early warning system, helping to identify others who are ready for contact. But I'll be supporting your group in ways you might not always recognize." Marcus understood. Each person awakening to expanded consciousness had a unique role to play in humanity's evolution. Some would serve as bridges between scientific and spiritual understanding. Others would work directly with the beings of light who were orchestrating the transformation. Still others would focus on practical applications, finding ways to integrate cosmic consciousness with earthly responsibilities. As he prepared to resume his drive home, Marcus felt the magnitude of what was unfolding. He wasn't just returning from a business trip that had been interrupted by an impossible encounter. He was returning as a participant in the most significant evolutionary leap in human history, carrying knowledge that would help reshape civilization itself. The highway ahead no longer seemed like just a route between two cities. It was a pathway into humanity's future, leading toward possibilities that yesterday would have seemed like fantasy, but today felt as inevitable as sunrise. Marcus merged back into traffic, knowing that by this time tomorrow he would be part of a community dedicated to serving as midwives for humanity's birth into cosmic consciousness. The journey was just beginning, and every mile brought him closer to understanding his role in the extraordinary transformation that was reshaping not just individual lives, but the entire trajectory of human evolution. The messenger's visit had been an invitation, and Marcus was ready to accept everything that invitation implied. Marcus Thompson's encounter on that lonely Wyoming highway represents something far more significant than a single, impossible moment in the darkness. His experience illuminates a truth that's unfolding across our world right now. Consciousness is awakening, reality is expanding, and ordinary people like Marcus are discovering that the universe is alive with intelligence that has been waiting patiently for humanity to recognize its presence. The messenger's words echo through every equation Marcus now solves, every circuit he designs, every moment he stands in wonder at the elegant complexity of existence. Science and spirit aren't opposing forces battling for supremacy over human understanding. They're different languages describing the same magnificent truth. The intelligence that designed the laws of physics is the same intelligence that designed love, compassion, and our capacity for wonder. Perhaps you've felt it yourself, those moments when solutions appear from sources beyond your rational mind. Synchronicities that seem too meaningful to be coincidence, dreams that carry information you couldn't have obtained through normal means. A growing sense that consciousness extends far beyond what conventional science acknowledges. These aren't signs of imagination or wishful thinking. They're evidence that you too are being prepared for the greatest awakening in human history. The transformation isn't coming sometime in the distant future. It's happening now, one consciousness at a time, one impossible encounter at a time, one moment of recognition at a time. Marcus discovered he was never alone on that empty highway, and neither are you. The universe teems with intelligence that wants to guide humanity toward its cosmic destiny, but only when we're ready to receive that guidance without fear. What about you? Are you prepared to recognize that reality extends far beyond what your instruments can measure? That consciousness itself might be the fundamental technology from which all physical laws emerge? That love truly is the force holding all existence together? The messengers are waiting, the network is connecting, and your own awakening may be closer than you think. Awakening may be closer than you think.